Hey, how's it going? This is Andrew Quinones with the Pomona Promise Network podcast. And today we have special guest in studio, Dr. Jose Calderon. How you doing, sir?
Well, I want to thank you for inviting me and for having this setup, because I think this is I call it the new productive forces.
Right.
And if we don't play a role in it, then those who are the corporate not only own the technologies, but they own the communication to our communities.
That's right.
And we need to develop ours.
Absolutely.
So what you're doing is right on target.
Yeah.
This is the way the whole global world is moving right now.
Well, during the pandemic, when we were at home a lot, I spent an incredible amount of time watching YouTube. And I started seeing all these podcasters, and I thought to myself after a while, I think I'd like to do something like that in my community. It's an effective way to communicate, thoughts and ideas in a visual way. Remember before the pandemic, maybe you'd read a newspaper or see a flyer or a lot of times getting our information that way. But by the blessings of God, I was able to write some grants that allowed me to buy all this equipment. And I really wanted to share good stories, share the gospel with community of the good work that people like you are doing.
And I'm barely beginning to find it. I was asked to do a presentation in Aguascalientes. I went there before because there was a day laborer from the Day Labor Center. Eduardo was his name. Over there, he was known as Chico.
Uh-huh.
And he started a center, just like the Day Labor Center here. Only immigrants coming from Honduras and other places, they're sort of a halfway point to the border. And I told him I went once, over there to see all the work they did. I was so impressed. And then he passed away, So I said, I can't do it. I can't go over there. So what we did is we set up at Pitzer where I spoke to about 200 people from Aguascalientes in a setting where they, at the end of my presentation, asked questions, a lot of students. We went back and forth, and I said, wow, we can cross borders in not only communicating, but in organizing. This is such a powerful.
Yes.
And so I'm glad you're using it in the interest of community. Yeah.
Well, I'm just a vocal point, a microphone to the greater work that others do in the community. Yeah. And on that note, again, I've known you for at least 20 years now. You're an amazing man with a wonderful wife and family, and you got a special place in my heart. And I really wanted to take the opportunity for you to share with the greater community, this Pomona Promise community, a little bit about your story and who you are and how you came to this point.
Well, I grew up in Colorado, but I was born in Madera, Chihuahua, Mexico. And actually, I didn't even know I had real parents. I guess when I was very little, I got me engrié with what that means is I got so close to my grandmother that I did not like to go back home to my mother. And then the story they say is that there's two stories, but one is that my grandmother stole me or took me away. Either way, I ended up with what were my grandparents. And luckily, the husband of my grandmother, he was her second husband. He was a citizen of the U.S., but he was baptized in La Placita. Then his father took him to Vachiniva in Mexico, and he grew up there. He didn't come back till he was in his 50s.
Wow.
So he was puro Mexicano, didn't know any English, and moved to a little town called Alt Colorado in Colorado, and was a farm worker all his life. And so was my grandmother. I didn't find out that they were not my real parents until when I got married.
Wow.
And an uncle told me. And then Rose and I went to Madera, and just knocking on doors, I found my mother. And then I found I had all these brothers and sisters. I only saw her once. She passed away that year from cancer. And then later I found my real father in Vachiniva. In Huachochi.
Yeah.
And he lived among the Tarumaras,
Is that right?
And and they loved him. and he was a mariachi and also was on the radio. So everybody knew him.
Yeah.
And he passed away. And when he passed away, about 60 tarumaras came out and marched for him. So luckily, though, I had parents that were farm workers. We lived in a one-room house, outdoor toilet, wood in the winter. It was cold. I would chop wood. But luckily, I had a good teacher that stayed with me after school, pretended to want to learn Spanish, and would point to the door, and I would say puerta, then she would say door. And if it hadn't been for her, I wouldn't be here. She took the time, because this is before bilingual education. Mm-hmm. There were 7 other young Chicanos from the barrio.
Yeah.
They all left school by 6th grade. And I think it had to do with the language.
Yeah.
And luckily, I go on to graduate. I get a track scholarship to a junior college, Northeastern Junior College, and then eventually an academic scholarship to the University of Colorado. And I graduated from there in 19. I'm an old guy, 1970.
1970.
And I had written a thesis there called The Rhetoric of the Chicano Movement. And my conclusion was that one of the best strategies of all the leaders nationally was Cesar Chavez. So when I graduated, I caught a bus from Colorado. My mom would tell me, "Está loco, muchacho," you know.
Now, you said your mom, this is your grandmother.
My grandmother,
Yes.
I call her my mother.
Of course.
She brought me up.
Right.
And I ended up in Delano. I met Cesar Chavez. I was only going to be there a week. I ended up staying most of the summer, and it affected the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I had been accepted to law school. Every year I kept saying I'm going to go back, and for 14 years I organized in Northern Colorado. At one point I was co-chair of La Raza Unida party with Porky, statewide. I came out here. Actually, I was on a panel at one time in, I think, 75 in Los Angeles at USC with Bert Corona, Maria Elena Durazo, who's now a state senator, Gil Cedillo, who ended up in the assembly, and the guy who eventually becomes mayor. At that time, he was Antonio Villar. I was actually on an immigrant rights panel with at USC under an organization called CASA. So anyway, I spent 14 years and then got married, had children, couldn't live like Gandhi anymore, had to figure out how I was going to survive. And luckily, my advisors were still alive. This is how important grades are. So I applied for a fellowship at UCLA from Colorado. And I even forgot about it. The spring came, May, June came, and I get a letter that I've been accepted. And that's how I ended up out here with my family and finished a PhD at UCLA. And there was a job opening at Pitzer College, and it fit right into my organizing and all that.
Yeah.
So I ended up at Pitzer. One of my students actually was Fabian Nunez, who was a radical organizer here in Pomona at the time. And one day I remember I had a class, and he comes to class and he said, "You know, Pomona just passed a law that anyone caught on a corner will be fined $1,000 and 6 months in jail. And what are we going to do?" And I didn't know what to do. And so then I told the whole class, okay, I'll tell you what, go out to those corners, because there were about 11 corners in Pomona at the time, where day laborers gathered looking for jobs. And I told them, look, get their stories and come back and bring them. And then we'll decide what to do. Well, I tell you, that next class, we're talking about, a class, probably about 20. The next class was one of the most powerful classes I think I've ever been in, because not only did they come back with the stories, they came back with the day laborers. And then the day laborers told their story. And then they pushed, and we organized a big march on City Hall. We filled City Hall. And
what year was this?
The result of that was a day labor center. 97.
1997.
97.
All right.
And we were able to eventually get $50,000 from the city to start the labor center. And it's called the Pomona Economic Opportunity Center. Now it's going still very strong. They have a staff still doing, great work. And then later in 2000, after organizing with the day, I was on that board with Francisco Suarez for years and years. And then I know we wanted to talk a little bit about the Latino and Latina Roundtable. The Roundtable actually started from this professor, Harry Pachon, who was nationally known. He did studies on demographics. He was the director of the Tomasi Vera Center, which had been at Riverside. He was a professor at Pitzer. Then he moved the office to Pitzer. And most of their studies, which were national. And one day he calls me in and he says, Jose, we've done all this national stuff, but now we're doing some local stuff. And we're looking at the demographics of San Bernardino County. We're looking at Riverside County, Pomona Valley. And he had like 10 cities where we called them majority-minority cities, where the people of color were now the majority. But the school boards and the city councils were primarily white. And so then he said, look, I'd like to present this to about, some leaders that you can pull together, and we'll pay for the breakfast, we'll do the lunch, and we'll have it in the founders room at Pitzer. And I said, oh, sure, and so we're talking about 2002. And I pull all these people together, and I'm just barely finding some of the people who were there. So Magoo was one of them from Pomona. Francisco Suarez was there.
Now let's tell some of the people. Well, of course, Francisco Suarez is an attorney,
right
here in Pomona. He had an office, yes,
and a long time on the board of the Day Labor Center, and helps on immigrant rights. Another early one was Russell Hadeke. And Russell does all the immigrant rights work in this area behind the scenes. He's a lawyer, también. Gilbert Cadena at the time, who was a professor at Cal Poly until recently. He retired. Yvonne Gutierrez, who actually was one of my students at Pitzer, she's been heading up financial aid offices.
Wow. And then, of course, Magoo. Magoo is a international Chicano artist.
Right.
At one point also was a professor at USC.
Well, and he was a professor at Pitzer
UCLA.
And at Cal Poly. And he taught in various places. We helped him out. He was an example of one who really gave his life to the community.
Yes.
And, he didn't have funds to survive often. And so he was really an example. And yet, like you said, he was nationally known. But he was one of the early, I found his name, founders, and also this priest, Father Nieto from Our Lady of Assumption. So anyway, we did have this meeting where Harry was going to show the demographics. He didn't show up, and I'm freaking out, and there's at least 50 people there. And so we had to ad-lib, and I think Gilbert and others will remember that. And we went ahead and talked about the demographic changes and everything. And then what followed after that, Father Nieto, who was this really strong priest, gave us room to meet at Our Lady of Assumption every week. And we were a loose-knit group. We weren't, we didn't have bylaws and all that. But then little by little, the Schwarzenegger decides, he gets elected if he gets elected, he's going to do away with a bill that would have allowed at that time for undocumented to have driver's license.
Yes.
And he cut the bill. The day he cut the bill, I remember at the Day Labor Center, we had been preparing at least 20 day laborers to take the test in Spanish. And, we would even wait till late at night in that parking lot and then teach them how to drive. One of them even hit a tree with a car, but they were ready to take it.
Yeah.
So when this happened, they were in tears. And, we always followed the philosophy of Cesar. And Cesar always said, if you get frustrated or you have deep pain, don't take that pain out on yourself. And he says, also, and here he was talking about gangs, don't take it out on others, organize, right? So that's what we did. So with Father Nieto, we organized a march from Our Lady of Assumption all the way to Los Angeles.
Wow.
Through 22 cities.
22 cities.
3 days of marching. And we arrived with about 1,000 people on a Sunday. And it led to long-term, that particular struggle. Then, and you know that, we took on the checkpoints in Pomona, where we found at one point in one of the studies that the checkpoints that said they were trying to stop people with alcohol and all that, it got to a point where 97% of those being stopped were undocumented.
Right.
And they would take their cars, they would fine them for not having a driver's license. They had to go to court. And in most cases, they never picked up their cars. So then the cities in the area would sell their cars at auctions.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we began to do is we began to hold signs in front of the checkpoints, letting people know that there was a checkpoint ahead. In fact, our first actions to stop the checkpoints, there were students that were arrested. And Jim Zambrano and others took up their cases and found, no, they have the constitutional right to do that. So that was our first victory.
Mm-hmm.
And then we won many more victories, that they couldn't hold checkpoints in front of churches, in front of schools, in the daytime and all that. And then other cities followed. But the most important part that followed, and it was Pomona, who I say led the way. It was individuals like Madeline Rios, Maura Ayala, and Melissa Ayala,
Yes.
Who on a petition began to gather names in support of driver's license. And ultimately, they gathered over 10,000 signatures. So Gil Cedillo then introduces this bill in support of driver's license. But the grassroots struggles played a big role in that. And that then resulted in statewide passing a bill where I think we're up to 1.5 million right now that have received not only their driver's license, but they have the right to insurance. So that was a major victory. And that's when we started getting serious about maybe the Latino Roundtable becoming an organization. But what really did it, brother, was into the Immigrant, immigration service, began to pick up people randomly. And they came to both Pomona and Ontario. And in front of stores, in front of schools, I think one weekend, the total was 432.
Wow.
And I remember me and Jesse Diaz, who'd been a student of mine, and Father Nieto, we get together on a Monday in a restaurant with other people. And so what are we going to do? Well, we got to march. We got to protest this so they don't continue it and they put a stop to it. And so with Father Nieto's help, we there was no time to get a parade permit. We couldn't get a parade permit. So he said, what we'll do, and Father Nieto, he had this philosophy of Cesar II and doing pilgrimage marches. He says, because my view was, the protest, there used to be there is an information office, immigration. We'll just do a picket in front and call the media and have a press conference right across the street from City Hall, because we thought we'll draw 50 people, 100 people, and we'll do it there. No, Father Nieto says, no, let's march from Ontario to Pomona and still end at that INS information place. Because again, we thought 300 people, something like that. So Father Nieto wanted to have it on Sunday because he wanted to invite his parishioners. And I remember I got really nervous on Saturday because I went to the Day Labor Center. I was organizing cars to take people. And the day laborers are telling me, you know what? They're not going to be anybody there because the Chivas are playing. And there's a rumor in the barrio that immigration service is going to come and pick people up. Mm. And so I got really worried. So we had a flyer. We went out and flyered that Saturday afternoon. So the next day, my plan was to show up about 10, somewhere around there, at the Day Labor Center and pick up people. And I told all the people to bring their cars. So I show up at the Day Labor Center, and this is what's to come. There's like 30 cars, and they're all full.
Yeah.
And we don't have enough for everybody, so I had to work out people coming back. And then we do the caravan. That in itself was a protest. and we arrive in Ontario. I had the equipment, the microphones and stuff, and I arrive and there's Joe Baca already and all that. But there were already a good 500, 700 people. This is a good hour before.
Wow.
And it just grows and grows. And I'm setting up the microphone and everything. So in the end, when we're getting ready to march, it's thousands. And there is no way, our plan was to march on the sidewalk. Then we wouldn't get ticketed by the police. Well, there was no way. We took the entire road, all the way down, all the way down to Pomona. La Opinión wrote an article on it and said it was the largest demonstration ever in the Inland Empire. And they estimated 10,000 people. When we arrived and we came, under the bridge over there,
yes,
there's no way we could go in front of that. So we had a rally in the park. And that's what solidified the seeds of the Latino and Latina Roundtable. And after that, then we moved to having officers, having a board of 11, and then beginning to organize on other issues, education. We were continuing immigrant rights, and then more recently, new economy. But just one last thing that I want to say on that is that we always had this philosophy, and I had that, and I know it comes from working with the farm workers. So my heroes in Colorado, I remember, were Jerry Ryan, who lives here now, Redlands, and Magdaleno, who were organizing the lettuce strike, and they all lived on $5 a week.
Wow.
When I arrived in Delano, that time I met Cesar, everybody lived on $5 a week. The medical doctors in the clinic, they had a cooperative clinic, $5 a week. The lawyers, $5 a week. Everybody, organizers. And I remember sleeping on the floor of a young medical doctor, only $5 a week. So when I go to Colorado, money's no, I do a center and start organizing over there for 14 years. So the character of the roundtable from the very beginning was just all volunteer.
Yes.
We never had a staff. And then we did start doing one fundraiser a year, and that was a Cesar Chavez breakfast. And it was on the basis of that funding that, we would continue. And I remember one of the first struggle and one of the first divisions that happened in the farm workers was where Cesar was just adamant that, we got to continue to live on $5 a week. And some of the lawyers began to say, well, now I have family and now, we need. So Cesar ended up losing on that one. Eventually, they began to pay staff and all that. And it's only until recently then that we too, but there is a lesson there, the movements, organizations that have survived have been able to very professionally, and I would say sophisticated, figure out how to get grants or raise money from the community in order to survive. And those that haven't figured that out, most of them are gone. They're not here today. So it is becoming a science in terms of,
yes,
it was that question, can we get funding and have staff and pay people and have an office y toda la cosa, and not lose our principles and values. And I think, that is the challenge. And so today we do have a director. We're developing a staff, a paid staff, alongside, but this is a whole different kind of board. All the board are activists. So all the board is involved in organizing. And our main organizing is in three areas. One is immigrant rights, which we do the education. With Pomona Unified, I can't begin to tell you how many workshops we've held, how many people we helped get driver's license. A while back, we helped hundreds get the matricula. How many, working again with Pomona Unified, we helped in terms of DACA and more recently, temporary protective status. So that's the character of that work. Mm-hmm. And then we have a local College for All coalition. So we developed a solidarity center where our office was with NAACP. And one of the collective, collective coalitions that we did together was we began to work with a statewide coalition. And this is a great strategy called College for All.
College for All.
And College for All was based on that, people of color, we're getting into colleges now as a result of the organizing, but we're still not graduating in large numbers. We have to figure out how do we turn that around. And so they began a strategy where we even helped write bills. One of them was SB 1050, which when Kevin De Leon was my former student. So my heart was broken recently when all this stuff happened with Kevin in Los Angeles. But before that, he was the speaker, and he helped us in passing bills that were educational bills. And SB 1050 was one of them. And that was way over $200 million. Pomona Unified ended up getting over $1 million from that to help students finish, not only graduate, but go on to college. And then in college, they're finding one of the reasons our Latino or African American, drop out a lot of time, there's no follow-up. So this funding helped to follow up, and the result was tremendous in terms of the graduation rate. So
when you say no follow-up, what do you mean by that?
I'm talking about our young Chicanos, Latinos. A lot go to college and they come from families where they're very close, and there's a lot of support there, or the community support. And if they go off to Berkeley or in other places and they start, that part is missing, and it is so important. But also, there are real problems in terms of that if they don't know professors and they don't know. So this funding allowed for already someone being cognizant of them and connecting them to the resources to graduate. And it did increase not only the number going to the college, but it increased the number who graduated. But I have to tell you, Andy, this strategy really works. So now for 5-6 years, we've been doing it every year. The statewide coalition is made up of 70 organizations, and locally NAACP and the Roundtable have been part of that. We meet, we figure out what bills we are going to support, educational bills. We go through this whole process, a retreat, we read the bills. In some cases, we help write the bills. In some cases, we work like with Portantino in figuring out what bills we need, what are the needs of students in terms of health during the pandemic. And then we have what's called Advocacy Day. And we fill a busload of parents and students who we prepared to speak and meet with legislators, and we go to Sacramento and meet with them on the bills. But it doesn't stop there. Then we come back, and as the bill is making it to the Assembly and the Senate, we're pushing, we're calling. Recently, the COVID committee here of about 60 organizations helped us in passing some of those bills. So this last year, for example, we passed 5 bills educational bills that the coalition supported. Everything from making it easier for junior college students to be able to go to the university, to funding for health centers on the campuses, to community schools. So with Pomona Unified, with the help of Ion and Maria Garcia, we would meet at the Parent Center. And I'm talking about the Roundtable NAACP began to work with Pomona Unified, and we played a role in writing a grant for the community schools as part of this effort. So Pomona Unified got $1 million and set up 3 community schools. Well, this last year, and we're the nonprofit that's on the papers and everything in terms of, now they have 13 community schools. They got $10.1 million this year. So that what we're doing is not just talk, and it's not just, we need to change the numbers in our colleges and we need to graduate. We actually pass key bills. So the College for All has been very, very successful. And now, in fact, February 5th, we're having this major speaker, Ira Harkavy, who runs, well, he's the director of a Netter Center in Philadelphia.
Yes.
And they do not only community schools, they do university assisted schools. They've got all the colleges involved in the schools with the idea that a lot of the problems in the community, the foundation of those kids who are coming to school and some of them drop out, has to do with what's happening at home in the community. And sometimes it's the parents not having jobs, it's the parents not having good health care, not being able to have any pathway or access in terms of what can change their lives. So this idea is not community schools and university assisted schools helping to change the conditions in the community that are creating the dropout rate or the absentee rate. And the community schools are already playing a great role, because in the past, when a kid got into trouble for whatever, let's say said a bad word or something, kick them out for 5 days. Now the alternative is there's a community school.
Yes.
Where they continue to meet with you, what your needs are, connect with the family, and keep you in school. And long term, that is going to really work. And then the last one that we have is what we call the well-being economy.
Well-being economy.
And this is related to a national movement called the New Economy, that right under our very eyes, there's a new system emerging. And that system is not based on the individual, which, here there's been a tendency to just promote that, profit in everything, right? And if you step on someone to get up there and make profit, great. The gross national product is all based on measuring only with what funds the corporations are making.
Yeah.
It doesn't measure
happiness.
It doesn't measure that along the way, maybe DDT, maybe brown lung or black lung, it doesn't measure any of that. And so this whole well-being economy now, and it's emerging all across the country, is based on producing local wealth. And the statistic is that local businesses that are small, 80% of everything they sell, the profits from that stay back in the community.
Yes.
And that helps the schools. That the corporations, the percentage is almost the same that goes out. So it's about supporting local wealth. And then the new emerging idea are these employee-owned companies, where the employees own their companies and they divide up the profits, and also then cooperatives, which are also based on that level. In fact, I was telling you about this taxi company in Denver that's all immigrants, and they set up their own taxi company. And the foundation of their support is so strong because all the nonprofits say, we want to help these immigrants. The churches are saying we help, and it's being so successful that the big corporate companies now are trying to attack them. But these nonprofits and these churches are not letting it go. They're still telling their parishioners, you got to help these immigrants. Look at what they're doing. And the character of the cooperative is that they meet and they divide up their profits equally amongst themselves. So it's really a high level. So based on that, we got funding from the city to now develop. We're working with Chirp, which is a solar panel factory here. And they have the same outlook. We're going to be hiring about 30 to 50 workers, train them on solar panels. And like I told you, Rose and I, we've been waiting to put solar panels on our house. But ultimately, we hope we can get the churches, the schools, the city, the hospitals, and others to do these solar panels. And it does many things then. It helps provide jobs for people who don't have jobs. It trains them. On another level, then, it keeps the money in the community. And then ultimately, I think it lays a basis for, if this really works, then developing other cooperatives, such as laundromats or other places where we can, not only help people to have jobs, but then to also, like in this case, help save the climate, the environmental stuff. So that's a part that we're really into. We've always been into with Cesar Chavez Park on the February 3rd. We're going to have a day. You've been there, Andy. We clean the park. We preserve the murals. A lot of people don't know that the movements like the Cesar Chavez Park came from people actually saving the land in the barrio.
Yes.
And not allowing the barrio to be gentrified. And then also that, at one point they vilified the barrios.
Mm-hmm.
And, there was an article in the Daily Bulletin a while back. I have that article where someone on one of the commissions in Pomona called, the barrio third world cesspools. And that's an exact quote, and said, what we have to do is places like where Cesar Chavez Park is at, those places are run down and
by a railroad track and a bridge.
That's right. And what we need to do is buy the housing out and then build it in such a way that Cal Poly students will come and buy the houses, gentrify it, right? Yeah. Well, the movements have been very effective in not allowing that. But a lot of people don't know, and there's a book about this by David Diaz, and it's called Barrio Urbanism.
Barrio Urbanism.
Barrio Urbanism has a whole chapter on how in places like Denver, people began to take over the parks and the swimming pools and really utilize them for the community, after school programs to keep kids in school. But a big part of it was now to show the beauty of the barrio. And that's the art part,
Eso.
The teatro, the music, and the murals. So all over the Southwest now, you find these parks, but they have the murals showing the beauty of our culture so that our young people grow up having self-esteem and seeing these leaders that contributed so much. So that's another part that you've been part of, Andy, and that we've always, from our corazon, we go and clean the parks, we go and do, and Pomona is very special because they're moving to the level of developing all the parks.
Yes.
And then naming them after Martin Luther King or Cerda in terms of indigenous Cesar Chavez Park. And then thinking about in the future, providing jobs for directors and people who can do programs out of those parks right in the barrio.
One of the things that I've been working on this past year is called Pomona ACT, All Children Thrive. And I've been working with a group of youngsters, high school students, looking at our parks as places of community. I'm proud to say that I wrote a grant and I got a little bit of money to do a 6-month project where I'm going to be working with 2 mentees doing 3 mural projects in 3 different parks, where I get to work with a youngster on teaching them how to navigate it's called art in public places, basically civic engagement. How does a young artist go after public funds to bring beauty to a park? And they're also being trained by other artist friends of mine. So I always bring in other artists that are much better than myself to add to the mentoring process. And so these kids are getting some training in civic engagement. They're getting professional development, and they're building their network. And so one of the projects that I thought it was just wonderful that we're doing is I'm working with an artist named Oscar Mayaganes, and we're creating stencils to paint on the sidewalks of the parks. So when people are walking, they see a positive quote and a motif, artistic motif that's culturally appropriate for the area that we live in. And it fills my heart with joy that I get to bring a little part of my spirit, encourage the next generation to add beauty to our parks.
Yeah, no, I really think that's where it's at. The tendency, there is a whole movement on the right to actually wipe out more of the humanities, not realizing that so many young people, they have this talent of, it can be the guitar or music, the teatro, and all those. And there's never enough funding for it, I mean, if there's a legacy to Magoo from Pomona, it's that Magoo got known not only nationally, but internationally.
Yes.
Internationally. And in fact, his art is in Washington, in the National Endowment there. But yet, Magoo passed away from prostate cancer. And I think it had a lot to do with Magoo was always just very poor and trying to sell his art. And I know Gilbert and I helped him, Gilbert at Cal Poly, to teach one class at Pitzer, but it was never enough. And it's a work that we have to do with the society in terms of that not everyone is going to go to college, for one. And so we have to work on other careers and the beauty of those careers.
Yes.
When I was on the LA County Board of Education, and in fact, we're partially working with Pomona Unified, me and Science from Maldiv helped develop a program because we realized they have 11 camps. And these are halfway houses for young people when they're getting out of jail. And they would always paint this beautiful picture of how great the schools are there. So then we asked a simple question: is can you show us your recidivism rates? They weren't keeping recidivism rates. We couldn't believe it. So then we demanded it. The following year, we began to get recidivism rates. And it showed that those young people coming out of those camps are going right back. Right back to jail.
And as you know, working with Danny Haka for many years, we did the gang intervention work in the community. And the recidivism rates, I mean, really 80% of the young people that were incarcerated were returned.
That's right.
And as I'm hearing you speak, we've come to realize that the best way to reduce recidivism is by building community, a network of support. Right. Somebody's more unlikely to return to jail when they have a community to lean on.
And the problem is they already have it on record. I mean, they have a record. And so a lot of employers don't want to. So you know what we did? We began a program, and now it's working with some of the unions. And so we began to, before I left on the LA County Board of Education, which Gloria Molina had appointed to me there, and then Hilda, before I left, they did a report on, for example, all these kids had been gangs and now they were plumbers, making $50, $60 an hour. So the plumbing was one. Those who work on the telephone lines were another one. UFCW, in terms of they were able to get employers, the unions, to overlook the record and say some of these young. In fact, the report was that some of these young, once they were given the opportunity, they were great. They were fantastic. Yeah. And one of them that really filled my heart, I can't tell you, Andy, was those who went into the art world and then were given opportunities. It was one. But you're one of them. And it reminds me of that poem by Lalo Delgado. He's passed away. He was from Denver, a poet. And it was called, he wrote a poem called Stupid America. And it said, Stupid America, see that Chicano and Chicana with a knife in their hand? They don't want to knife you. They want to carve Christ figures. Really? They are the Picassos of our Western states. But stupid America, you will let them die with 1,000 masterpieces hanging from their minds. And he really captured, I think, that if we don't understand that part and the creativity, the potential, everything that we can give them in terms of the knowledge we know, then something bad can happen to them because of the conditions that they live in. And so, I thank you for everything you're doing. And then, all the work that I know is happening in this larger community of so many people, really like this new economy thinking, are using their lives and placing the interests of the community at the very top to raise the quality of life. And that's, that's the highest level of giving that you can possibly give. And also, what's difficult is it's hard to measure that because a lot of, and I know you, Andy, and all the stuff you do behind the scenes, and it's not measurable because there are so many people doing that. But where we begin to see it is when, like what you're doing here, all these, the Pride Center that's, just open, the different centers where the young people themselves are running them, coffee houses and little businesses and all that. I think that's where we begin to see the results of our work. The many young people who are graduating and now coming back. I'm thinking of two right now, just came back from Berkeley, and graduated as a result of our efforts. And I think that's what fills our hearts and then keeps us going, no matter what.
Well, Professor Calderon, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to ask you a little bit about what are some of the challenges that you believe we're facing nowadays. And we'll leave it off with some hopeful things.
Okay, sure.
Yes?
Yes.
All right. We'll be right back.
Tampoco soy tu religión, hacerte cargo de tu vida, mi amor, no significa posesión, no significa.
Okay, we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to the Pomona Promise Network podcast. We're sitting with Professor Jose Calderon of Pitzer College, a wonderful man that's done such wonderful work throughout the years here within our community from California to Colorado, yes?
That's right.
All right. So Jose, I'm sure that you've overcome a number of challenges throughout your life. What were some of the greatest challenges you think you've overcome and you faced during this whole process of you just giving so much of your life to the community?
Yeah, and I know a lot of young people that have to go through that. I think the biggest one I had to face is that in my school when I grew up, I became the model Spanish kid. I learned English as others in the barrio did. And along the way, my real name is Jose Guillermo Zapata Calderon. So the teachers changed my name to Joe William. And I think they would have changed Zapata, but they would have used shoes or something. So I think a lot of what we faced and I faced was the challenge and the obstacle of assimilation to the point of and I didn't know, I look back and in my case, we lived in a one-room house. In the winter, all we had was a wood stove and a calenton, wood. And I remember when I had to study, and we're talking about even going to the 6th grade, I actually cut a broom and I would have a stick and I would create a tent under my bed because it was so cold and I would study. The teachers never really understood why, I didn't finish or I fall asleep or whatever. And then the other one is the schools had a tendency to make me real ashamed of the way I lived. And then I look back on that and I get hurt inside because I sometimes blame my parents for how we lived poorly. And, we didn't even have a television. I remember listening to the radio and pretending it was a television. And then I would pretend I had a bookshelf and I would bring books from school because I would see Spot and Dick and Jane and they had bookshelves y toda la cosa. And so I remember being so ashamed that I had to chop wood, for example, and I would do it in the dark. It had to be either early in the morning before I went to school or late at night because I didn't want anybody to see me, And then when I went to high school, I was, I'm not bragging, but my first year, I lettered in 4 sports. And because of me, they changed the rules the next year that you could only do 3 that 4th hour. I did baseball, football, basketball, and track. And so I chose track over baseball the following year. But we went to state in basketball, and I was the guard. And during that time, the farmers in the winter would come and pick up my father and give him jobs y toda la cosa. Later, when I graduated, I realized that maybe that was a form of payback because when I went to college, now my father was like a day laborer. They were not, coming anymore. But I also remember, and they won't see this as discriminatory, but I remember that every year they would have a parents' night, and all the players would bring their parents, right? And they bring you out to the middle they bring you out to the middle of the gym
Uh-huh.
and introduce your parents. Well, my parents never wanted to come. They felt so out of place, farm workers, and I sort of didn't want them to come, because I felt so out of place. So I remember being introduced and going out to the middle
Right.
by myself. There were so many examples of that, but what I have to thank is my parents were so strong, my mother, that they never let our culture go by. So we would celebrate Dia de los Muertos with an altar.
Ah.
They wouldn't let me forget my Spanish. They would take me to the movies to see Antonio Aguilar and Pedro Infante. I grew up that part. I was living two worlds, the world at home and then the world at school. The world at school, which sort of vilified all that, and then the world at home. So I have them to thank so much for retaining that aspect of who I was. And then when I went to college, especially at the University of Colorado, and you had United Mexican American Students, you had them organizing for Chicano Studies and all of that. There was that part of what my parents had taught me then that gave me the passion for connecting to those movements. And I really was part of the movement in Colorado to get more Chicano faculty, more Chicano students, Chicano studies, not only at the University of Colorado, but at the other universities, and then in the high schools as a result of that. And I had to make a big decision because I had been accepted to law school. I went out and met Cesar, and I had to make a big decision. Do I go to law school or do I go back to my community?
And $5 a day.
Well, and I had nothing then.
Totally.
This was on my own. And I decided I'm going to try to go back. And I went, and my parents had a house that they eventually, with very little money in the barrio, bought. And they had a garage in the back. So I took the garage and I painted it red with a big Huelga eagle. And then I cleaned out the inside and turned it into a little school for 18 young kids.
Is this a 20-year-old Professor Calderon?
Yes. And
Okay.
I'm teaching them English, and the barrio just loved it, And I was using the Paulo Freire method. I had no money.
Okay.
So I would go to the grocery store and I'd get these boxes and I'd cut them up into squares. And then I'd give each a box with their squares, and I'd ask them, how was your day? Good, malo, bad, and so they had their words.
Mm-hmm.
And how kids are, they begin to take their words, they share them, and pretty soon they're becoming bilingual. So the parents in Little Alt, Colorado, and I have pictures of this in the the Denver Post, Rocky Mountain News. They went to the school board to ask for bilingual education. So the school board told them to go back to Mexico if you want to learn another language. Literally told them that.
Wow.
And then I had two young Chicanos that I had organized, Eddie and Paul. I don't remember I don't forget their names. They got a petition for bilingual education. Well, the principal called them in and told them, you keep passing out a petition, I'll kick you out of school. One day they come early, 10 in the morning. So what are you doing here? They got kicked out of school. I was so mad. Make a long story short, rather than just a march on the school, we marched in the middle of winter, December, from Little Alt
In Colorado.
all the way to Denver, Colorado.
Wow.
70 miles
Wow.
through cities. But it made front page news in the Rocky Mountain News. And that resulted in coming back and organizing walkouts, and resulted in some of the best bilingual programs, Chicano studies programs. Today, we can say, we helped develop that. So that story has two parts to it. And one is that, the foundation of that went back to how the challenges I had to face. And then also, as a result of college and all the movements and UMAS, understanding that it wasn't due to individual, but that it was systemic and that we needed to change the system to do that. And that when we begin to resist, you learn, you do get blowback. And then again, like Cesar said, the way you respond is organized. And that's what we did. And so that little lesson for the rest of my life taught me of how, not to accept injustice, but to always work with the community collectively to organize, and turn it around. And that was also a way of overcoming what the school, and, of course, that's changed somewhat, but especially what the schools did to you at that time. You either had to go along and assimilate to what they considered to be, and they did call me the good Spanish boy. In fact, if someone called you Mexican, they had identified the word Mexican so bad that nobody wanted to be Mexican, right? So how then when I went to college, and it helped me with learning about my culture, learning about my history, all the contributions, they call it self-esteem, but it gave you such passion to understand that what they were saying was individual problems, that it had to do with institutional problems. And then with people like me, and there were so many like me that went back to their communities to try and change the institutions, which were creating the problems, which a lot of our people really felt it was there. And so I'm really an example of someone who overcame that part to really see the importance. So that's why I totally support ethnic studies, because we learn about, not only about our history, but what had really been we lost our land. We went from owning land to farm workers to being pushed out of school, and so very few of us, and they always said we weren't smart enough. That's why I still boycott Coors beer, because when we asked for Chicano studies and Chicanos at the University of Colorado, because there were so few of us, Joe Coors was on the Board of Regents and responded. This came out in the Denver Post, that if they're too stupid, use the word stupid, to get admitted, why should we set up special programs? And if we set up special programs for them, pretty soon we're gonna have to. So we had to march. We had to take over buildings, and then we did something that they never thought we would do. We went throughout the state, and we found 87 Chicanos and Chicanas who were qualified to go to the University of Colorado, but for various reasons, the counselors never told them. They didn't have money to go to school. There were no programs to help. Or even in the case of the parents wanted them or needed them to work. We brought those names back, and still Joe Coors went against it. But the result of that was some of the first educational opportunity programs. And I remember we began to graduate so many that went on to become teachers and doctors and lawyers. I remember Jerry Martinez, who graduated and ended up the state attorney in the state of Washington. And so those have been the challenges, and those have been the responses. And I have learned that often the way we resist and the way we turn things around is, like I said, with the roundtable when we did those marches, but we also then have to organize these projects, economic development, education. And then at the same time, which we've learned more and more, is registering our people to vote, getting out the vote, because we're becoming a majority in many places, but that doesn't mean that we have political power. Right. So teaching our young people then how to turn the anger and frustration, not just into marching and protesting, but also into the electoral arena and electing people who truly serve the interests of our community.
Right. Now, it certainly seems that you've overcome quite a few challenges in your life, and I'm sure there's many things that you're proud of. In this modern, in this day and age, as you're still working with students, what do you think are some of the challenges that our gente are facing these days?
Well, more than ever, and it's right now. And I think it's at the highest level that I've seen xenophobia and the racism and the division that is being whipped up against our people like never before.
Like never before. Now,
like never before.
Again, this is when you came from a school in Colorado where they changed your name.
Oh yeah.
To Americanize it. And so is it really coming full circle?
Yeah, and years that I went to jail, fighting for the farm workers and all that. But we have politicians right now, and it's accepted. And I look at DeSantis as one of them. Of course, he's not running now, but all the Republican candidates were. It got to a point where they were even promoting the invasion of Mexico, to stop the numbers that are coming over here, wiping out asylum, refugee, Trump, the kinds of things he's saying right now. The New York Times, I just put it on Facebook. New York Times on Friday of last week came out with an article where he's talking about the blood. They compare it to what Hitler was saying way back in Germany and what was aimed against Jewish people. And if we don't watch it, it can very easily lead in that direction to where rather than seeing the problems, and this is hard to educate on. I mean, the billions of dollars that are being spent in Ukraine or right now in Israel and Palestine, these are billions and billions. We're talking about 500 billion. And now I know they're asking for another 112 billion right now. And the Republicans are holding it back, saying, we'll give you those 112 billion for Ukraine and Israel and even Taiwan and enforcement on the border. If, they're telling Biden this, if you go along with all our immigration policies that are really draconian, that are really aimed at the highest level possible. And so what's happening in the country is you have international economic problems. Even the Mexican president, Obrador, just came out and said how much the wars are resulting in inflation in Mexico. In Argentina, it's 100%. Because all those countries...
100%?
100% inflation.
Wow.
All those countries, whether anyone likes it or not, the power of the dollar is powerful, even in the countries where the sort of progressives have won. And their economies then are not really controlled by them. And when you have inflation and you have poverty that is due to global problems, the migration that is occurring from Guatemala, Honduras, and all those places is not just based on cartels or violence. It's really based on that those economies cannot provide jobs, people are poor, and they come to the border. And from everything I've studied, this global economic and the role of corporations in those countries, going way back to when they were colonized, is not separated then from they're making more profits than ever. And here in this country, then they blame the unemployment rate or the economy on the immigrants. And then it's very easy then to blame in those countries that it's just the cartels or it's just the government and not the multinationals that are forcing people to move. So that is such a big challenge right now, to be able to raise consciousness and education, and then to not allow them to, what can happen is to create division among us and have people believe that it is the immigrants, that it is the refugees, that it is the poor that are taking the jobs, that are creating havoc on the border, and that are destroying our system. And I think the level of xenophobia, the level of racism is at a higher level than ever before. And you also see that in whatever Trump says now, it doesn't matter, or what he does, there is a chance that he might win this election. And the character of the way he acts, the way he works, the rhetoric he uses is very, very similar to what happened in Germany, where the working people were led to believe that this authoritarian figure could save them.
Right.
And it's very possible he could win, and then we're going to end up in a situation of, I consider it forms of genocide. And I'll tell you why. Because we still have more Latinos in jail than we do in the schools. Those Latinos cannot vote. We have more African Americans in our prisons than we had slaves during slavery right now. So if you have a strategy of really diminishing our potential political power, then jail them, deport them, let them die due to the pandemic. Latinos and Blacks were the largest groups in terms of deaths during the pandemic. And it wasn't separated from then the kind of health capacities that we have or that we've been, left out of. And then the continued, kind of oppression that takes place in our schools, and the violence that we face there, and being left out, and racism. And then the last one is they're doing everything to diminish our voting rights, making it harder in the Black Belt South. They have actually won, last I saw, 29 positions of secretaries of state. These are the right wing, to be able to control the elections, and then who's appointed, to even take the vote, those kind of things. So in all those areas, we're facing real possibilities, destroying whatever democratic forms we have to build our potential political power. And although then people of color are becoming the majority, and then Latinos in various places, we are the majority. There are all these things happening to, keep us from having that political power.
Now, just recently, I listened to a speech that was given by the president of Argentina at the World Economic Forum. Do you happen to follow that?
Yeah, I don't think
Klaus
I saw
Schwab
that one.
Well, I would definitely recommend that you watch it. And I thought it was just interesting. Now, one of the things that, for me, that I worry about as the future unfolds is people that subscribe to the beliefs or the agendas of the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab's. Oh, you own nothing and be happy with it.
Right.
I guess we would call it the fascism, where corporations with governments.
If you study what fascism is, it's authoritarianism.
Right.
The corporations control in many of these countries. So what's happening in places like even Brazil and Peru. Right now, there are 8 countries in Latin America that have left or progressive governments, but they're having a real difficult time because they're not separated from a global economy, and in their countries, the multinationals, and then the power of the dollar. The dollar is still very powerful, and then the trade agreements and all that, and then they end up also owing to the banks,
yes,
the international banks. And stuff.
Yes.
So it's not isolated then that people like Lula in Brazil pulled those countries together. And they are trying right now to develop a separate currency, so where they don't have to rely on the dollar. It's only going to be that kind of thinking, where you begin to develop your own independent financial economy, which also means then you have to figure out, like they did in Chile way back when they nationalized copper. But you saw what happened in Chile when they did that. But they have no other choice to be able to, survive, and then really be able to channel the capital that they have to the people, so they don't have to migrate. So that's happening right now, where they're trying to do that. And, if you don't have that analysis and you really study it, then it's very easy for Trump and others to then say all these people that are on the border, and now they're really diverse.
Right. It's just not
they're
Latinos,
Asian,
right?
They're Black. In fact, 20% of those being deported are Black. 20%.
From Africa.
A lot of people don't know that. Yeah. And so, well, and Haitian. And others. And so they try to make it look like then all these people are criminals and they're cartel, they focus on cartel. These are families. And in those countries, the reality is, even in the progressive countries, the global economic control is so big that the conditions force them. So I told you, I was in Zacatecas.
Yeah.
And I went to a protest, and they were protesting a U.S. company. And you know what in that company, the auto company, in that company, they pay them here $35, $50 an hour.
This is a NAFTA kind of thing, right?
Yeah. That's what they make in a week over there, and I couldn't believe it. You know what they were demanding? They were demanding the minimum wage that people get here and that. And then there's only so many that get jobs. I have 5 family members on the border that work in maquiladoras. And they work they've been working there years and years, and they still can't afford a house, because you get paid such low wages. These are the corporations. If the U.S. and other countries were really interested in solving, let's say, the immigration issue, then you would pour capital into those areas where people need the jobs the most. And also then you would hold those companies, accountable and force them to pay people what they should pay. And not allow them to pollute the air y toda la cosa, right? And to fund after-school programs for the kids and all that. But that's not their interest. They love the immigrant to come here and work without any rights, and then when you're done with them, to go back. There's this Republican representative in Orange County who said that. He said, I love their work. We need them, but I'm not going to support citizenship. You think they'll vote for me? That's what he said. It's an issue of power. And they are going to ensure. Can you imagine 12 million being able to become citizens? Right. The political power we could have. Well, the right knows that most of them wouldn't go with them.
Right.
And so they do everything right now to stop the political power of African Americans, Asian American, Latino, LGBTQ, women. And then those allies in the white communities that would unite with us on those issues. But that's what we have to do in this time period. More than ever, we need to build multiracial coalitions.
Multiracial coalitions.
Yeah, and that's really hard. See, some in our Chicano community who come out of the early movements, to me, don't understand the significance of supporting the particularity of a movement. Yes, our movement is different, let's say, than the African American, and our conditions are different. We lost our land. Language is a big issue still in our community. There are particular African Americans have a particular. Some of our Chicanos can get away with being white, but African Americans cannot. And then their whole history going back to slavery. LGBTQ who have particular issues so we have to support the particularity of women, for example, and this issue of choice and all that. Be able to support it, but then for what? Do we organize in our Chicano communities just to separate and say it's only our movement that we're interested in? Or do we then build unity while taking up the particular issues in those particular movements, build unity that unites us around the larger systemic problems that are not only local but global. And that does take building, multiracial coalitions and not just focusing on our particular group. That's a real challenge, because what they're doing all along the lines right now is they are doing everything to divide us.
Right.
Black against Chicano.
I grew up with that.
Yeah.
Right.
And they'll
Pomona.
throw out crumbs right now. That's the problem with some of the funding too. will fight over the crumbs amongst each other rather than seeing, and I want to point out, I think San Dimas, what we did in San Dimas recently, and I'm talking about the Roundtable and the NAACP. So when the Minutemen came, and Professor Gildo Ochoa is writing, for some reason, the Minutemen chose this area to fight the sanctuary bill. And so they went to Pomona, they went to Claremont, they went to Upland, they went to Laverne, they went to San Dimas, they went to Glendora, to get these cities to join an amicus brief against AB 54, the sanctuary that was passed statewide in support of immigrants. The sanctuary bill basically said that, local law enforcement is not going to cooperate with the immigration service. That's right. They have a separate role. We beat them in Pomona. You saw they came, 80 of them, in the same in Claremont, 80, 90. In San Dimas, the same thing. And there we organized, we got the community out in support. We won. In Glendora, 80 of them show up, Azusa students show up, Roundtable show up. And at one point, the city manager, and the press enterprise covered it, city manager asked, what should we do about the immigrant issue? And this is scary, because they began to chant, kill them all. Kill them all. But we got up and we spoke, but we didn't go that direction. We related how much our immigrant communities contribute, and how to support this amicus bill is to create more divisions in our community and all that. Well, even in Glendora, we won. And afterwards, this whole group, I'm telling you, this whole group of white residents from Glendora came over to these Chicano students from Azusa and other places and told us, look, we don't agree with everything you say, but we want you to know that we liked the way you handled yourself. We liked what you said. And those people are not from here. Orale. And we want you to know that we support you. And I got to tell you, Andy, that since that time, we've developed ties with some of them who are now running progressive people. Yeah. So what happened in San Dimas, though, is we had never been inside City Hall, San Dimas. And on the wall like this, we saw the pictures of all those who had been elected since the city started. And there was not one person of color. Not one. And only one white woman who actually had been appointed, not elected. So we didn't stop. We, after that, pulled the Southwest Voter, MALDEF together, and we threatened to sue them, take them to court on the basis of that. Now, this took some research, and I call this participatory research. We did the research. Participatory research. We saw, this is research where you participate in social change, but you use the research for social change. And we found that San Dimas has transformed like other cities all along. Yes. And that in just about every area, the majority are what you would call minority. They're people of color. So we won. We forced them to redraw the maps. We got 3 of the districts we wanted that are now, those are majority Asian, Black, Latino. And we ran Eric Nakano, who is Asian Pacific, and he won, right? And now we're running for somebody from the NAACP, James Shirley, and we're running this woman in this other district. And we win that one, then we'll have the majority. So not only did we win against the right wing, those were the same people saying, don't wear masks, the vaccine is from China. They had tables in front of the grocery stores until we told UFCW who they were. Those are the same people. And we won. Tremendous victories at the grassroots. And now, we're showing how then we can also win elections that are quality of life. And although it's on a small scale, those are the kind of strategies that we need. And the difference, Brother Andy, that it still hurts me with Gil and Gil Cedillo and my former student Kevin De Leon, that when they met in that meeting room in LA. I think the real problem was that, you know, on one level, they did see that, hey, we're now Latinos, we're now really a large group in LA. And in these areas where blacks are, like Compton, for example, Compton now, blacks are no longer the majority, it's Latino. And so they were really looking at, are we represented democratically on the council with our numbers? And basically they were saying no. But where they got into trouble, and that's where we did the opposite, where they started looking at taking districts, even where blacks were, and making them, that was the real foundation of that. And so African Americans were turned off, regardless of the other language that they used. Well, what happened in San Dimas, we called it a unity coalition. We started from what will serve the larger community and how do we build coalitions in these different areas. And yes, you know, have someone like Eric Nakano, who's Asian Pacific, and I'm Latino, and David Estrada's Latino, James Shirley is black, Jeanette Royston from MDO, but we will support Eric Nakano because, you know, he stands with us, and he is progressive, and is the kind of person who's fighting for quality of life that we want. So at our recent open house, the Roundtable has a Solidarity Center. Who's there? Eric Nakano. And Eric will be one of our speakers at the next Roundtable. So in a roundabout way, I'm answering your question about what do we need to do in this time period.
Yes.
And it is, still take up the particular issues that affect our particular communities, whether we're women, LGBTQ, Black, Latino, Asian, Indigenous, but then at the same time figure out how do we build unity while still fighting for those particularities around the larger systemic issue to make sure that we can use the electoral process, the legal process, our organizing protests around a country and a society that is really based on using our resources and our funds for health, education, and quality of life. And that we can unite on. And that's the challenge right now. That's the opposite of what most of the Republicans and most of the right wing are promoting right now. And if they win, we're going to have if we thought it was bad when Trump was in there last time, this time, who knows, because he is saying January 6th was okay. And if we have to do that again in many different ways, we'll do it again, and he's getting away with it. So the challenge is right now, too, to get out the vote and make sure that we elect the kind of people that serve the interests of our communities.
Now, over the years, you've worked with thousands of students all throughout, I'm sure from a lot of young people that are involved in the struggle sometimes continue to feel like it's the David versus Goliath. We have these challenges. What is a message of hope that you could leave young people with?
Yeah, if you just get stuck on the polls, and we have to remember that the polls are controlled. But overall, what I see happening, I see a young population that is emerging, that is at a very high level. And in some cases, I saw this article in the New York Times where they will take a job, and if the job is not in terms of quality of life, that they will leave it.
Yes.
And
without putting their 2-week notice.
No, I mean, some heavy things out. When Bernie Sanders ran in New Hampshire, it was interesting. They did a poll. They found the majority of the people, the kind of socialism, he used the word socialist. Mm-hmm. So over 50%, I said, whoa, that's incredible, There's something emerging among the young people, and that's why you have this emergence nationally. 10 million employee-owned companies, cooperatives, all this stuff happening at the grassroots level that to me is very, far-looking and visionary.
Yes.
And that is doing what you're doing here. They're using the new technologies to organize in new ways. So to me, that's those are the possibilities. The danger is there, but on the other, something new is emerging. And I have a lot of faith and a lot of spirit in that. And the kind of unity they're building is bringing together those particular groups and then building motions. So we've won a lot of victories. Choice, you've won in that level. Right now with the UAW, the organizing that's taking place, and the big victory just yesterday of the teachers, the students organizing in the schools. You have all this stuff, this new stuff emerging, and so no, I have a lot of faith and a lot of spirit that kind of thinking and that serves humanity more, and that is crossing borders to build unity with those countries, those movements in those countries, that in the long term, it will win. And
amen.
Yeah, and I feel that I'm part of that.
Yes.
And that I'm one that gets tired at my age, but that this is a moment in history when more than ever we have to step up and be out there. And my character of organizing and even a lot behind the scenes, especially in the electoral arena, is more down here at the grassroots, and then getting out the vote, and then when we have to protest, raising education, and then bringing people together across gender, sexuality, intergenerational, all those different lines, including labor. And our practice shows that. And Andy, I just have to say this because I know I get into trouble. People don't like me, but one thing those people can never say, and this is coming from the heart, is that, and I tell them, did I ever cheat you? Did I ever hurt you? Did I ever do something that was in self-interest? And it's very hard for people who are out there who know you to find that. So we'll differ on strategy. I mean, one of the differences I have with some groups, and I know I was like that when I was younger, but still there are those who are just oppositional and then find very little positive to work for. And I will tell them, that, people want to hear what you're for and not what you're against.
Yes.
And so we'll differ in our practice on that and how we work with, let's say, politicians. I have this philosophy of, there are some in our community with some of our representatives who'll say, maybe they did 2 or 3 wrong things, or they voted wrong, okay? And they'll have nothing to do with it. My view is the opposite, that's what they want. They've been elected, especially if the Chicano community has elected them. So we have to hold them accountable. And I'll go to their offices. I'll call them. I'll write to them when they're in there. And some people think that doing that is wrong, Or I'll work with those who I see serve the community, but maybe have made mistakes, And what I try to look at is, and I've made a lot of mistakes, whether they learn from the mistakes and they try to correct them. That's one, because Cesar, he made mistakes. And I know even now, when I was on the LA County Board of Education, I had to make a lot of decisions. And every time in my mind, I would say, I'm serious about this. And this is how I got through that, being in that position, because we had some hard choices to make, especially on some charter schools You have a black charter school right in front of you. And then I would think in my mind, okay, after reading all this stuff, what is in the interest of the community? Oh, and what is in the interest even of those young, African Americans there or young Latinos? And then I would make my decision because I had to vote, right? And sometimes I made a bad decision, I later learned. But when you do that, and I really do that, you can sleep well at night because you know that you weren't doing it in self-interest. Right. And also that if you made the mistake, then the other philosophy is I will grow from it. And that makes me even a stronger individual, a stronger leader in the community, because I know next time, what I have to do. And I look for that in people in the community who make mistakes, but they're good people and they're trying to do the best they can. And then they show in practice, that maybe you don't agree with everything they do, but in practice, they are making every effort to do what is in the interest of the community and not just self-interest,
Yes.
And with that thinking, I think I get into trouble with people who they won't say it, but have self-interest as dominant. But inside, I understand and know, and that keeps me going.
Now, Jose, as we bring this podcast to a close, do you have any call to action for the community that's watching today?
There's so many calls to action, but one for sure is that we're entering election year. And there are a lot of people out there saying don't vote, that they're, unhappy with all the candidates. And a call to action is to get out and vote. And also to get as many people out to vote as possible. And then to do citizenship drives to get those people who are undocumented but can become citizens, and those maybe who had just become citizens to get out the vote. And I think it is a point in the history of the world, in this country, where the decisions that are going to be made will have global repercussions. So I'm placing the electoral work, at the highest levels possible, and that we have to, more than ever, I'm convinced they're doing everything to stop our political power. So it's not just having the numbers anymore, and it's not just getting a few crumbs here and there, but it's where we really have to show in practice, where we begin to have some power, but good power, and then be able to use the resources that, for the community. And nonprofits, Andy, I just saw, and I'm not good at this, but I just saw where Maria Elena Durazo, who came out of, she was a great organizer. Maria Elena Durazo is a woman like Dolores Huerta, and she loves Dolores Huerta, who kept saying when she was younger, we can organize the janitors, we can organize the hotel workers, but we need to organize the undocumented who are in there, because what they do every time we have a drive, they divide us. And in fact, if we organize the undocumented, they will unite with us. Then together we can raise our wages together, and they can't divide us. So she is known. That's her legacy. She did that, and she was one of the first. And Los Angeles, one of the first that moved all those hotels to unite with a lot of undocumented, the janitors, on and on. So then she gets elected to the state Senate, right? And I've never seen anyone who just keeps that kind of a grassroots thinking. So, and I talked to her and she says every university right now has a business department and they have millions of dollars. They've always had millions of dollars. And they graduate all these students with the traditional form of thinking, like that. That's why this country has lifted people up like Trump, based on you step on anybody you can as long as you make profit and the gross national product goes up, that. So she says it is conscious that we don't have any labor studies departments and we don't have any labor centers. We have business centers. So what does she do? She writes a bill in the state legislature, $13.1 million for life, forever, every year, to develop labor centers and labor studies departments at every university in California.
Wow.
And it passed. So Kent Wong, for example, who was heading up the Labor Studies Center, just stepped down as the director. They put it in to head up this whole program that not only have they developed, or they developing labor centers now every university, they now have developed one in Mexico City and in other places they're looking at worldwide. That to me is, and then Luis Reyes helping to fund a nonprofit in her area,
right.
In terms of the work. We who work down here,
yes,
we work our butts off to elect some people, but we don't think on that level that, hey, they can actually write bills that result in our taxes and our resources coming back to us.
Right.
And that was an example that she showed that I think we should do, so that it shouldn't be just let's elect people, but then after they get elected, because they have now some into the taxes that we pay, how do we now think on the level of getting those resources back to the organizations and the people
yes.
at the grassroots who are doing this work? And as I see more and more of that, as I see cooperatives, employee-owned companies, as I see, throughout the country, the rise of a new economy that is really based on quality of life and not just profit and not just the individual.
Right.
And I see thousands and thousands of those examples. It lifts my spirit, and something is happening here. This is where I want to end, brother. Something is happening here. See, I'm one, and I'm not I used to be real religious. I'm not a very religious person, but I believe in the creation of what I call spiritual spaces. And you've been part of those.
Yes.
We've been part of those out in the parks. But spiritual spaces where the land is clearly right there, this planet that's going around the sun at 167,000 miles an hour, the little piece of land, then the people who are there, and then you not only create unity among them, but then you have material forms, whether it be parks, whether it be these offices, community centers, or even sitting in places like the city council or the assembly. One thing, and that relates to Paulo Freire, that we have the capacity to create culture. And that culture can either be oppressive or it can be liberationist. And it can either be for the individual or it can be collective. And, the example you have here, these plants right here, for example. I had a student, Andy, who, when we talked about this, and we read a book on community gardening as social activism, talked about how even planting one plant, and the book has what percentage it helps the ozone. So this student, this just happened during the pandemic. This student, and because we were doing Zoom class in her home where she was living, because we were having, in her room, the next week she asked to speak to the class. And she shared a plant and then what the plant was. And I said, yeah, that's everything we talked about last week. She she did that every week. And it filled my heart, because it was putting into practice this creation. And then the very last day of the class, the very last week, she asked just for a little longer moment. And her entire room was a forest, right? And then was able to relate also the percentage that it was helping the ozone. And that to me was the biggest example of how, we can create spaces even in our own home. If you come to my home right now, Rose has over 100 plants in the backyard. And then I've gotten into saving rocks, heart rocks. So I've created a labyrinth, and we have the capacity to create a labyrinth or a spiritual space that we walk when we get up in the morning to plan. And like the indigenous did, the 4 directions, to strengthen ourselves each day. And I can truly say then I have a peace pole. And the peace pole, I sent for it because it's directly connected with Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and now, worldwide, Guernica in Spain. Just as examples in my own life of how to create spiritual spaces. And that becomes stronger when we work together, and then those spaces grow into cities, states, nations, and global. And that's, where I want to leave, that we have that capacity to create the kind of society that we all have a right to live in. And hopefully we can bring that to our young people, and that it's long-term, it's not short-term, and that long-term we have the capacity to create a space that's the earth, a systemic change where people work together and instead of wars, use the resources to really allow people to develop to the highest levels with good health, good job, good education, and most of all, a high spirit of quality of life.
All right. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you, brother.
I
appreciate this spiritual space.
And I appreciate all that you've contributed. I mean, you lift my heart, and you're just a person that I love, and
You too, brother.
I'm grateful for you.
We have that commonality.
That's right.
To the very end.
That's right. All right. Well, you keep on inspiring people, and I look forward to having you back. And I guess on that note, Pomona, we will see you later. Peace.
Yes. Que viva Pomona.
Que viva! All right.
All right. Thank you, brother.
Wonderful.